So let's start. This course is about the web development, and this is the first edition. So it's kind of a spin-off to Excode, and the idea is to do something that's, I think, a little bit more interactive and engaging, which is web development. So kind of a homework, if you haven't done it so already, I heavily recommend downloading VS Code. You can also use it on the web directly, but having it downloaded, it's available both on Windows, Mac, and Linux. It's really good. So if you haven't done so already, especially if you're online, just go, you just search Visual Studio Code download. It's done by Microsoft. It's kind of a really safe application. And it's an IDE, so it's integrated development environment. We saw it during Excode. The main idea, it's a place where you can write your code, basically. It's like just in Word, you write like your assignments, your text. VS Code is exactly the same, but just for code. So the whole idea is it's a place where you can write code, and it does a lot of things for you. So automatically formatting, putting the colors, spotting errors, helping you debugging. It's really good, and that's what we're going to be using for the next 4 weeks. Jeremy is also going to use it. So a little bit about the course. These 2 initial weeks are going to be introduction to web development. So I'm going to do the front end first, which you're going to see what it is, and then also the back end. And then Jeremy is going to do 2 weeks on something called React. React is a UI framework for doing the front end in a more streamlined way, but they build upon each other, so they don't go against each other. So we've done it on purpose. So at the end, you can do applications that are actually what the industry standards are, and that's exactly what they do, even more than what they do in CS, basically. So these are homework. If you haven't done so, start downloading it now, and then you can create an account later on. It's free, obviously. So this is how I learned web development. So it was in 2020. I had done already 1 or 2 years of web development before. It was a huge, massive course. So you can see there's 70 hours of on-demand video. Probably took me 150 hours to complete the course when you add all the exercises, everything. And today, I mean, we're trying to do it in 3 hours. But it should be fine, because I think that, and it will be fine, because now, first of all, I was on my own, so I didn't have any network. I was learning everything by myself, and no one in my family around me was a developer. Then also there was no AI. AI, I think, is a huge game changer. There was no support. I did not really knew how to use the web and how to learn interactively. But now there's plenty of resources, plenty of content, and hopefully there's also us to help you. So we're going to do it in 3 hours. And we also have a much more hands-on learning style. So my lecture is probably going to be much shorter, and the rest is going to be what we call kind of pair programming, which is we code together and we go into the code and we write code together, so that then you can have your own projects. And I'll show you actual projects. So we're going to start with an introduction to the web. I'm going to write here as well. Hopefully the people online can see it as well. Try to make it see for everyone. Basically, the whole idea is to first spend 5 minutes to understand how the web works. So the internet, the web is kind of a subset. But the internet, the whole idea is to make computers communicate by themselves. So normally you will use a cable to connect all the computers. When you have a lot of computers, you have intermediary computers that act as a network. And if you've seen, there's the graphs of all the cables passed under the water. That's how it works. So the internet is just communication between computers. The web is actually something that transits between those communications. So it's something that passes between computers. The whole idea here is that there are 2 different types. There's client and server. This is a simplification. But basically, the main concept is that there's always a communication, an exchange of data between 2 parties. The client is the front end. The server is the back end. So the client is your computer in this case. When you go to a web page, the client is your computer. And on the client, you ask for something and you get something back. So let's try to draw that here. So yeah, hopefully everyone sees me. So this is someone's computer, okay? Just draw it as a box. Let's take Apple website as an example. You want the Apple website. So you're going to say, oh, I'm going to write bigger maybe. Apple.com. What happens is when you request that, you request it to a server. So this is a computer that acts as a server that will take the other side of the communication. What this computer is that it stores and says that apple.com is a set of files. It's something that needs to be displayed. So it's OK, I'm going to give you data, which is files. And you get this data back. And that's why when you go to apple.com, it's not the same. You don't see the same thing on your computer than if you go to Facebook or if you go to any other website. So the web, in the core essence of the web, is a communication between computers to exchange data, to exchange information. Okay? You have a client side, which is the side that we're more used to see, which is all of our computers. But actually, theoretically, your computers could also act as servers and redirect other computers. And so you have normally a server side, which is the one that associates with an URL some data. So for instance, as I said, if you go to a different URL, you get some different data. There's a whole great deal that could be made about how this communication is done. Usually the protocol is called HTTPS. It's called HTTP, and S stands for secure. So that's why when you see every URL, there's this HTTPS. This part is the protocol. So it's the way the data is transferred. There are others, but this one is the main one. Then there's the domain, which is in this case apple.com, with two sections usually, a dot and another section. And that domain is the core domain. A company can buy a domain. We will next week buy a domain, a free one, to show you an example. Usually domain, they also then have folders or pages, so like /home, /about. Hope you can see, but you can listen, it's good already. And you can also have folders, so like /legal, /privacy. Yeah, it's exactly what I'm saying. So home, about, legal, privacy. Inside of this, you will have different files. So if I go to apple.com/home, the home page, I have a different page than if I go to /about or /legal, /privacy. You have different files that you're getting back from the server. So that's basically the web in 5 minutes. That's how the communication is. So just what you have to get in your head is that you can have different pages. You communicate with a server and get some files. This week, we only do this side. We don't care about this communication. We don't care about this. We only care about the files on our computers. So we're not going to have a server. We're just going to display the files in our computer, as if the server gave it to us. We're just going to say, oh, these are the files, and we show them on our computer. This is basically a little bit the example of how it works. So the front end is the key topic for this week. So the whole part of the front end is having things that you show on the screen to actually give an information. And when you design a website, you write those front-end files to have something appear on the page. So for instance, to get some marketing leads or to get some people to buy your product, for instance. So every web page is composed of 3 main files. So this is the composition of the front end. The 3 files that you get back is always the 3 same. There's like de facto, there's always these 3. It's the industry standard. And it's HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And there's a great analogy that I'm taking from the course, which I think is just really good to understand it. HTML are the nouns. CSS are the adjectives. And JavaScript are the verbs. It's extremely simple. So let's literally just look at some examples. So if I go to the Excode website, HTML, they're the nouns. So it's the things that are on the screen. Like, for instance, the text, that's a header, a title. So we call it, in HTML, you would say header. That's a paragraph. So in HTML, you will say paragraph. It's that simple. It's not like a programming language. So HTML and CSS are not programming language. They're different. I'm going to introduce them. Only JavaScript is. So the cool thing is HTML and CSS, they do exactly what you want them to do. So you just say paragraph, and you have a paragraph. Or here you have a button. So that's, or an image, that's your HTML. That's a noun, so that's the thing that are on the page. CSS is your adjectives, it's a style. So it's how these elements are on the screen. For instance, the fact that leading is in green, that's CSS. You say, oh, the noun is the object. The CSS is the style, so it's the adjectives, it's green. The button, it's green, it has a rounded corner. CSS is also about the positioning. The text, it's centered vertically and maybe also horizontally. These 3 lines, they are green. So 3 lines HTML, they are green CSS. And then we have the JavaScript, which is the verb. When I click on this 3 line, magic, it opens something. So verb is the action. So that's every single website is 3 files. HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. The objects, the style of those objects, and the actions. If I click here, it opens a new page. That's JavaScript, because there's a movement, there's change, there's an action. JavaScript is a programming language. JavaScript is used to make more advanced logic interactions. For instance, if I have a counter and a button that does a counter, HTML is the button, CSS is, it's a blue button, that's 10 pixels, and that's rounded corner. And JavaScript is the variable that stores the amount of click, and that updates the number of count. For instance, 1 click, 2 clicks. So that's how you have the 3 files that come together. HTML is hypertext markup language. So it's a markup language. If you've seen Markdown, for instance, or even Word, it's kind of a Markdown language. Like it's just saying, oh, you want some header, you want some bold, that's it. CSS is a cascading style sheet. So it's style. And JavaScript, that's just the name. It's a programming language, a little bit like Python. The way these 3 works together usually is that you go and you have a file, which is an HTML file, which is your base. And then you have the CSS and JavaScript file, which you import inside of your HTML file. And then you give a name to your elements on the page, and you reuse that name in the CSS and JavaScript. You're going to look at an example. But basically, the idea is, if I go to Apple, for instance, every single element on this page will have a unique, either an ID or a class name. That's how we call them. So an ID is unique. A class name can be shared. So for instance, you see here I have 4 images that are really similar. They probably have a class name in HTML. So in HTML, I say, I want this image. And I say they have a class name of a specific name. Then in CSS, I can take that name and say all the images that have that name, they will be this size. They will take half the page, and they will have square corners. And that's how then I can define it. If then I want to take a specific element on a page, I can give it an ID. So I say, I don't know, if I take this image, I can give an ID in the HTML saying watch image, and that's the ID. In the CSS, I can say, I want it to take the entire page. And that's how I select it. And then also in JavaScript, I can use something called a query selector to select that element from the page. We go to the Excode website. That's exactly how all websites work. Yeah, basically that's it. That's all the theory for this week. There's not a lot of theory, just 3 things. HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You got all the knowledge you need. Now we're going to code. I heavily recommend people to program with me. So just if you have VS Code, open it. If you have got no time to install it, go on the web. We're going to go together and just work on it together, basically. So I'll leave 1 minute for you to open VS Code, and we're going to do it together. Okay, so on VS Code, are the people in person on VS Code all good? You're seeing something similar to this page? I recommend opening a folder. So to open a folder, you go on File, then you go into Open Folder, and you can select a folder. Here I'm selecting ExeWebDev, and then I open it. You can select any folder, make a new one. So you work inside a folder. This is locally. That's why I'm saying we're only doing the front end. Usually, you will have this on a server and then communicate with it. We're doing it on your own computer. That's why you're opening a folder. At the start, it's going to be an empty folder. There's no file in it. There's nothing in it. We can create our own file. So you go here, New File. You can create first an HTML file. It's kind of really simple. You just go home and then use .html. It's like we did with, for instance, when you want to create a Python, you say home.py. It's the same thing. So the first bit, home, is the name of your file. Can be anything. And the second bit is to tell VS Code and the browser and anything that your file is an HTML file. The way it works here is when you give an HTML file to the browser, the browser knows how to transform that into the element on the screen. That's how it works. So then I can create also 2 other files, which are home.css and home.js. To give you an example a bit before pair programming, in any website you go, you can actually see the code behind. So you can go here, right-click, and then go inspect. and you can see the code behind the website. And that's usually it's really badly formatted because obviously that's not for human to read, that's for the browser. You can see how the browser reads the code. So that's HTML code. And you can actually see the name of each element, and you can see how it is. And if you go into network, you can see all the elements that are passed from the server to the front end, to your client. You can do it for any website, and that's how actually you can modify websites. Like if I want to take a screenshot of this website and I want to remove this bit, I can just go inspect, and then just like this, you removed it. It's obviously only removed it on your client. It's not removing it on the server. If you reload the page, it's not removed. But that's basically how it works, how all browser works. So going here, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to take this file and open it on our browser, like this. Should work. If it does not, we can simply go and say copy path, and then just open it here. So what is happening is we're opening the file on our browser locally. At the moment, you can see it's empty. That's normal. There's nothing on that file. The file is empty. But then what is going to happen is when we add things on the file, the browser is automatically going to add them here. And when we reload the page, it's going to be new things on that page. Okay? So you either drag and drop. Usually it works. If it does not, you go on the file, HTML. You do here, right-click, copy path, and then paste it in the browser. And that's all the setup we need to do. We're ready to start coding. So here, usually, there's something which is you just put an exclamation mark like this. It already gives you an initial base, so you can all do it. So you don't have to write it every time manually. I'm going to explain it quickly. Basically, this is to tell your browser that you're doing an HTML file. This is to tell the browser the language. And then you have two sections, the body and the head section. The head section is just what you call meta information, so information you pass to your browser. So it's like the title of your document, or I don't know, the description, or your icon. And then the body is the content of that web page. So how is HTML format? How does it work as a language? It's entirely based around tags. And it's all about an opening and closing tag. This is a concept that some people find hard to grasp, but let's spend a minute on it. The whole idea is if I want something to be a paragraph, I say start the paragraph, then I put the content of the paragraph, and then I close the paragraph. If I want to take that paragraph and put it inside of a button, I say start a button, put the paragraph inside, and then close the button. Do you follow me? So it's always, that's how you define things, and that's how you can have interactive things. It can break sometimes, because you always need the start and the end, apart from some exceptions, but it's really logical. So here we can see an opening and closing body tag. And then we can put h1, which is a header of type 1, and put like header. And then what is going to happen is when I open my HTML page and reload it, I can see that header. H1 is basically saying a header of type 1. You can go from 1 to 6. Let's go with something a bit simpler. If I go just paragraph, I just type P. I usually hit the tab key. It does it for me automatically. If it does not, you have to basically put this symbol. The way you can distinguish an opening and closing tag is by this slash. So basically, you can say this is an opening paragraph and this is a closing paragraph. And then I can put this. Yes. And then I can see the paragraph on the screen. How are we doing? Are we following? Is it clear? Is it all right? Are you following me, everyone? OK, online, hope all good. If you have any question, you can ask them, maybe also later. Give some part from Q&A at the end. So basically, yes?
Could you please zoom your a little bit?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, is that better?
Thank you very much. Yeah.
OK, perfect. So yeah, the whole point is when I have a paragraph, I have to open it and then to close it. So if I now add one that is, I don't know, if I don't close it, this is not like Python. It does not break usually. So it should still kind of show something. Yeah, it does not break, but it still kind of breaks. It just does not display an error, but it's not the right way of doing it. So these are not programming language. So for the best, but also for a lot for the worst, they don't break if you make errors. Sometimes they do, but basically the whole point is you have to make it always have an opening and closing. And there's plenty of elements you can add on a page, just HTML elements. So if you go on the Excode, I think I've put just an HTML documentation, and you can find all the elements. There's plenty. You can put, as you say, headers, we've seen paragraph, we've seen buttons. You can add tables, you can add videos, you can add audio. You can add, basically, there's plenty. You can add, well, you see, body is the one we just saw. You can add a footer, you can add a main section, you can add an image, you can add Canva, data list, which is something we saw in Python a little bit, a navbar, a search, you can add inputs, you can add list. So that's basically it. It's really similar to Word, but just the way you format it is by having an opening and closing tag. So let's see another example. For instance, if I want a navbar and then a footer. So let's start with a navbar. I can say, I don't know, this is my logo. And then I could have an image tag. And let's see if I can find, let's see, Excode logo, if I can take that one. Images. That's probably not that, but let's just take a random image. If I copy the URL, it may work. Is there a way? Copy link. So what happens here is I created a navbar section, which is kind of a box, as a box. Then I say, oh, I want a logo. And then I say an image. As you can see here, the image has no closing tag. This is because there are some rare self-containing tags. So it means there's no, like an image, you don't need to put image and to put some content inside of an image. With a paragraph, you put some text inside. With an image, you just put a link. So there's no need to do that. So you can see I put a source. And let's say if it does not display, I say just no logo. Let's see if it loads or not. If I reload this, yeah, it's not working. It's not taking the link. But theoretically, what you could do is downloading the image locally. It works with copy and paste. Paste, yes. And then I can go here and say, so the alt text is if the image is not displayed, just display this text. Basically, if I go image.png, as you can see, I'm adding the image to my client side. Now, if I reload this, I can see the image, basically. So that's what I just did. I just added an element to that page. So for instance, in the Apple, you have an image here. I'm sure if I inspect this, it's there's a div, and I cannot find the image, but basically there's an image behind. It's probably hidden behind all of this code. It's an image, there's a text. It's exactly how it is built. So now we've seen how to add elements to the page. This is the HTML, this is the first bit. Now what we need to do, I'm going to remove the image just so that it does not. Oh yeah, maybe let's do this. Let's say that the image is way too big. As you can see, the image is too big. So what I want to do is to go in my CSS and make the image smaller, sorry. I want to make it smaller so it's like a navbar, like a logo like this. Like, in the Apple, you want maybe the logo like this. So how do we do? First of all, we need to include it. For instance, I go here. Sorry. So what I do is I go here, I say link, and this is a tag to basically add a CSS. So I go here and I say home.css. And now what I've done is I've added the CSS file to my HTML file. Basically what I said is, oh, I'm going to import the CSS file inside of my header, so before the content. So what is going to happen when I load the page, if I go into inspect and then go into network, we can see that it's taking home.css. It is loading it as well with the HTML page. So now here I have another file. And the way CSS works is I select elements from the HTML page. And as we saw before, it's done by class list, or by ID. So I can give an ID to this image, for instance. Let's say ID. So I say ID equal, and then I use this, and I give it like logo. So now here, I can select that logo from the CSS and give a style to that logo. The whole idea is that, as we've seen often in programming, there's a symbol that represents each category. So in CSS, and in JavaScript as well, the hashtag represents the ID, and the dot represents the class. So if I want to take an ID, I say hashtag, and then I say hashtag, for instance, we say logo. And I use the curly braces, which I hope, yes, like that. It's not my keyboard, so. And then I can give him a style, like I can give him a width and say 50 pixel. After this, I'm going to go over and review everything if you're not being able to follow me. But basically, when I reload the page, it has a width of 50 pixel. Let's take a small moment to kind of review what happened, OK? So we created, in our HTML, we created an image, and we take a source. So this is where the image is from. The image is locally here, so we put it here, image.png. What happens is the HTML is going to take that image and import it inside. Then we give an ID to represent that image. So for instance, the image has an ID of logo. Then in the CSS, I select that image by the logo by saying hashtag the name, so logo, and then use curly brackets to basically put inside all the style of that image. And then you can have different types of styles. Here we set a width, then 2 points, and we set a value. All the time in CSS, you have a style, then 2 points, and then value. And then this one, yes, perfect. So that's how you represent styling in CSS. So you always have like the selector, which can be either a dot for class or an hashtag for ID, then the brackets, curly brackets, and then I have this. Basically how we do all the styling in CSS. So then you can play with more styles. And to do that, we can also go into the documentation. We don't have to learn by heart everything. So we can go here and, for instance, see CSS styling basics. And if we look into attribute selectors, we look into, there's plenty of ways, but like images, I can see sizing images. And I can see how I can, for instance, give a margin. There's plenty of things I can do with the elements on a page. I'm going to look at more examples. And then there's the CSS, which we're going to look at, the JavaScript, which we're going to look a bit later on, which is about a counter. So now we're going to, in a bit, we're going to build a counter button and show how we can use the tree files to build that. Basically, this is our first page. And we can add elements, and we can see them displayed. I can also change the header here. So if I say, I don't know, my first website, this is the title header. So I can see here, I see my first website here. You can also add an icon here, or what you call a meta description. Let me see if I can autocomplete it. But I can add meta tags, basically, and then I can make it like a description. Then I could add some content for it. You've seen it autocompletes a lot, like, I don't know. This is my first website. And the whole point of a meta description is that when other people see a website, they can, when we index it, so like if I go like Apple and search it, this is the meta title of the page, and this is the meta description. And this is also the icon, and this is the URL. This is how browser show pages on a screen, on a browser. And then when I open it, it loads the three files, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So now let's go and let's try to put more advanced stuff on our page. If we want to add a footer, we go here, footer, hit tab. We can add a footer like copyright Excode. So we can see now it should appear on the screen. Usually, I always program with 2 screens because it's so much easier. So maybe we can try it like that. That should make it a bit easier. But usually, I have 2 screens or divide it in half. So this way, I can live see my changes. Can you still see, well, my code and everything like that? Yeah. So we're going to look a little bit about how we can style our page and make it a bit nicer and make it work, basically. So we can see now everything is just blank. There's no style, there's nothing. So we can go step by step and kind of style everything. In CSS, there's another concept, which is the border box, which is how every element is displayed on a page. So I can show you an example. This is one of the base concepts. Basically, every element on a page in CSS has the content, a padding, a border, and a margin. Take 1 second to just look here. This is kind of really important because this is how you're going to style your website and all the content inside of your website. So the content is just what's inside. The padding is the space between the content and the site. Then the border is what's around, and the margin is what's between that element and the other elements. Let's take a button. It's much simpler with an example. If I go on the Excode homepage, this button, let's see. The content is login and the arrow. The padding is the distance between the text and the outside. If I have 0 of padding, it's just going to be here around. If I have, for instance, it's probably 2 pixels, 1 pixel, it's this distance here. The border is this border around. Here, there's no border. And then the margin is the distance between this and the other elements. We can see here, the margin is probably 50% here, because it's exactly at the center. And here, it is probably 5 or 10 pixels. So this is exactly what we're going to try and do. We're going to try to do a web page where there is a title in the center, a button, and then a footer at the end of the page. So if everyone can follow me, do you have like kind of a base structure that resembles something like that? Just checking. Do you have like an HTML, CSS, JavaScript pages? Have you been able to import those? Following me? How it's going? Perfect. OK, I'll take some time, sorry. So I'll take some time, just making sure you're all up to date. Just you go into your HTML, you create an HTML file. Should have one already. You can add some element to the page. These elements, you can be anything. I recommend, if you follow me exactly, to have a navbar, a header, a paragraph, a button, and then a footer. OK? These are the core elements we're going to use today. You don't have to import an image. You can just leave it blank if it takes too much time. And then you need to import your CSS file inside of your HTML. It's a link, rel style sheet, and home CSS. You can use auto-completion. Like, you don't have to manually type everything. You can just go link and then hit tab, and it will do it for you. Same thing for all the other elements on the page. I recommend also, if you can, put it 50-50 between the web and then the VS Code. If you want to also add a title and a description, that's optional, because we're not going to actually put a website on the internet today. All good? Perfect. So now we're going to try to make this look pretty, add some style, add some movement, maybe another counter. So basically, if we go here and say, and try to select this. So the navbar, there's only one navbar on the page. So what I can do is, I don't even have to add a class name or to add an ID. I can simply go here and say, oh, I want to select the nav. And this, what it's going to do, if I don't put anything before, is just selecting all the elements that are navbars on the page. It's only going to be one, so I can just do that. There's no need for me to add a logo, to add an ID. And here I can style this navbar. So first of all, we're going to style the way it displays the element inside. I'm going to go in display, and I put flex. Flex, basically, it's a way of displaying elements. It's just a smart way. Because then what happens when I say display flex is I can automatically center the content. So I can go with justify element, justify items, and then put center. And then I can go to align items and go center. And what should happen, if I'm not mistaken, is it should center them. We have to also give it a width. So we say, OK, our navbar is going to take 100% of the page. See if it works. No, let me see. Yes, it's this one. Let's see. Let me just double check. I'm not sure why it's not taking the entire page. I don't code this like this anymore because I usually code with React. So I'm used to use Tailwind, a bit different things. Let me check. It is good because that's actually how I learn. You can use margin auto as well. It should work. Just one. That's an option. We can do it like this as well. Now it should be centered. Yes. It's not entirely centered. Amazing. OK, here we go. So basically what I did is I just say you want an automatic margin, so it's going to take half. In the navbar, we wanted to take the entire length, so width 100%. And then text align the center, so put the text in the center. So I can put, let's give a name to our project. The counter project. That's another way. Display flex is also another way that usually works. But this is another way. So basically here, what I did is exactly that. So I say, OK, there's the navbar that takes 100%. We can try to give a background color to the navbar just to see where it is for us to like kind of debug it or see how it is. So we can see in red, that's the navbar. So navbar is 100% from one side to the other. We can also set a height to our navbar if we want. So put it, I don't know, 20 pixel. And we can see that now it is 20 pixel. We put 50 pixel, and it's going to be much larger. Usually use F5 to reload the page. Makes your life much easier. With React, you're going to see it automatically reloads it. So this is only for these first 2 weeks where you have to reload the page every time. When you're going to learn React, React automatically reloads the page every time you make a change to your code. So this way you can just code and see the changes live on the page. But basically, we can see that's our navbar. So we could maybe give it like a slight background color if we want. Not really pretty, but we can maybe see if we can get, I don't know, white smoke. So it's a bit nicer. These are presets. I can also use RGB if I want, or X, or HSL. I can use whatever. It's still going to work. Usually, I just write the name of the color. If they're like really like, you can just write black. You can write the main colors. You can just write them. If it does not work, you can also go with RGB and then just put RGB colors. That's useful if you want a really specific color. But for the moment, just put white smoke, which is just like a variation of white. And let's put it maybe 20 pixel. Now we got a navbar and we got a name. In the navbar, in the future, we're going to have more pages. We could also put, I don't know, go to the About page, go to the Contact Us page. At the moment, it's just a single page application. Then what we're going to do is we're going to style the header. So we want the header also to be centered. Maybe we want to give it, maybe we want to put it a different color. We want to give it some attributes. The way we're going to do that is we're going to give an ID to that header. So let's give it like title. So then I can do hashtag title. What is going to happen here, as you can see, is that it's just selecting the title. So now I can also give it to him a margin auto. Then I can say, I don't know. I can give it text. Let's see, text decoration, for instance, and I can make it underlined. Then I can give it a font size and put it in 50 pixel. Let's see what happens. It's much bigger and is also underlined. Okay, so let's align it in the center. Yes. Maybe let's give it a margin top a bit here, because if we don't, it's just too close to a navbar. So just go here and say margin top, I say 20 pixel. Basically, what I'm doing here on the page is I'm putting the elements and one by one, I'm styling them. It is really manual way of doing it. Then you can go much faster when you use that. Libraries like Tailwind, which is probably going to use in week 3, or also when you have classes. So with classes, what I'm usually going to do on a big project, I'm just going to create a class for all headers, and then make sure that all headers have that type of styling. So for every header I want to add, I don't have to redo it manually. Just have one brand guideline and just follow that guidelines. And every time I add a title, it's automatically going to follow that. Like for instance, if I want to do a marketing website, just going to say, okay, this is my call to action. This is the styling of my call to action button. And every time I have a call to action button, I just give it a class call to action. And automatically what it's going to do is going to actually go and be automatically that style when I have that class. So just leaving a second for you to make sure you're on the same page. So now what we're going to do is going to create 3 blocks like this, and then a button at the end, and then a footer. So there's an element that we haven't seen that is really important, which is the kind of all the time element. So it's the element you can use all the time, and it's a div. So the div is the base element. It's like the blank one. It's the one you can use when it's not like a specific thing. It's like a box is a div. Like if it's not a bot, if it's not a paragraph, it's just like the blank that you can use all the time if there's no more specific elements. Normally, it's better to always use a more specific element. It's possible to program without divs, but div is like just a base thing, the one used if you have no other thing. For us, what we're going to do is basically, if we want 3 boxes like this, we need to first create a main box here, and then inside of that, put those 3 boxes. So this is our main box, and then we're going to do box 1 and say, and inside of each box, we can put like a header of level 2, say header 2, and then like a paragraph saying explanation. Then I can go here. Maybe I'll add a class to that. So I go class, and then I can say, I don't know, a box. And go here, select one, select another, create 3 of them. And see now, we have our 3 boxes like this, but they have no style, they have basically no sense. And I'm going to give an ID here, which is container. So first of all, to make sure that we always follow and see everything, let's just give a color to everything. So here, container, going to go background, color, red. Then I'm going to go with dot box. You can see here with dot box, I'm using the dot because I'm calling a class. So I say background, color, green. Now if I reload the page, you can see basically the green is on top of the red. That's why I'm not seeing red. But all of this is red, and then you have a space between these 3 boxes. Can you follow me? All good? So I have created 3 boxes, which are 3 divs. Inside, I've put a header and a paragraph of each of them. I've added a class to all 3. So that's why here I just have one line that says background color green, but all the 3 of them, they are green. Now, I mean, they're ready, but I can put a width of 100% just to make sure it always stayed the same. And this is where I can, for instance, change the way they're displayed. as you can see here, the displays as a row. When I go with display flex, basically, what I can do is I can change the way they are displayed. So I can give it another direction. So I can go with flex direction and say column. Okay? So what happens here is rather than putting them as a row, putting them as a column. Sorry, the opposite. So rather than I can put row and it's showing them as a row rather than as a column. So it was as a column and now it's as a row. You can see now they're one next to each other, but they're not taking the entire page. They're just at the side. So what if I want each one of them to take a bit of the page? Well, I can just go here and change the way I want to display. Usually what I will do is there's a flex display CSS shade sheet. And then we'll look at that and see basically how to style things. This is how you will show items. So for instance, there's flex direction, which you just used. So basically, when I say display flex, I just say the way this element should be displayed. And when I say display flex, I want it to be flexible, so for me to be able to edit it. Then I gave a flex direction. So rather than being a column, if we go here, column mean one below each other. I say a row, so they're one next to each other. Then I can add other things. So for instance, justify content is the way they are justified. Now, by default, they are flex start, all at the start. But what if I want to put them centered or at the end? So I go justify content. And we see in here, that's why we have to do a container. Because the flex, I'm doing the styling to the container to then put the inside things. So I put like center. And here you go. They're all centered. But now, as you can see, it's not really pretty because they're just one next to each other. So let's give them a gap. Go here, gap, and put 20 pixels. And put maybe a little bit more, it's a bit nicer. 100 pixels. So to show what happened, we created a box, which is the red one. And inside of it, we put 3 elements. We say that this parent container box is flex, is a row, and should have all the elements at the center with a gap of 20 pixels. Now, if I add a new element, it should smartly do it. Like, I reload. It's still keeping them centered and with a gap between them of 20 pixels. So I can add and remove elements. They're all centered with a gap of 20 pixels between each one of them. Coming back to the border box example, let's see here. You see header is really close to the side. It's not really pretty. So what I can go is I can go into each element and add a padding. So if I add, for instance, 5 pixels of padding, you can see I've removed one element. There's some space here. If I have 50 pixels, it's a lot of space. OK, so this is how I will do it usually. Maybe let's say that let's remove the background color now. Let's also align the text inside centered. A bit nicer. Yeah, like this. And maybe put a color that's a bit, something like that. And maybe also add some margin top to this so that it's not touched. You don't have to follow every single step. Top, 10 pixels, like this. So now what happens is, hopefully it's not as bad as having red on green. Then what we're going to do is we're going to do the counter and the copyright, and then we go over to JavaScript for the next probably 5-10 minutes. So here, let's remove this paragraph. Already looked at enough examples like that. So we have a button. We're going to style that button. Let's give it an ID. Call it counter, simply. We're going to also style the footer. Footer. So our button. Does someone from the audience want to go about how we're going to style the element? So do we want it? What color do we want it to be? Someone, color. What color do we want the button to be? Pink, that's perfect. So let's go background color, pink. OK, now when I reload, it's going to be pink. Do we want a border or not? No, no border, okay? So I go border, and I select 0. It's really straightforward. Usually the way you will do that is by looking at the documentation at the start or having AI, but usually it's always the same structure. So it's you give it this type of style, which is kind of what it is. So like border is the border, background color is the background color. So there's some technical name like padding, but usually what it does, it's what it is. Gap, it's the gap. Then you do the 2 points, and then you put the value that you want. So then when you create your own website, you can basically make it everything you want, everything that you want. You can add any style that you want. Let's maybe also add some margin top. We've already seen that, margin top 20 pixel. And maybe also let's, what can we do? We can make it a bit bigger maybe with 50 pixel and then add it a little bit of padding so it's nicer. How it looks. Let's put less. Maybe 100. Oh, maybe let's make more width so it's a bit nicer. So like 200. So this is how you will style an element. So yeah, now it's a bit better. Now also we can see there's nothing that tells us that there is a button. So what we need to do is to tell that basically when you hover it to show something. So what I can do is I can in CSS it's not like complex logic, but I can add something that says when something happens, do something on that element. But it's mainly for like cursor type style. So for instance, I select the counter. I add 2 points here, and I say over. So what it's going to do here is going to say, oh, when I hover with my cursor the button, what's the style that I want the counter to be? So I can say background red. And then I'm going to also put cursor pointer. And here, if I reload, when I go on top, it becomes red, and there's the pointer. This shows me I can click on that button, basically. That's the whole point. And then just to finish quickly, I'm going to give a style to the footer. So we get an idea of footer. So just in here, footer, and follow me if you want. What I'm doing here is I'm saying, OK, let's take the footer by ID. It's the same thing we already done. But I want it to be all the time at the end of the page. So I'm going to say display absolute. This time, if I reload it, it's not selecting it. ID footer, OK? And I can basically, rather than being part of the page, it's just absolutely placed. So I can place it whenever I want. So I can go here and do like bottom and put 10 pixels, for instance. And here, it is not getting selected. Let's see why. It's not selecting it. Let me check. I can go with position, sorry. Ouch. So position absolute. So what is going to happen is rather than I give it a position of absolute. So rather than have a position based on the other elements, it goes here, it's absolute. And then I say bottom 10 pixel, maybe, I don't know, left 200 pixel. So it's basically just positioning itself based on the size of the distance to the other elements. Or I can put maybe, I don't know, left 50%, so it's centered, rather than being based on the others. So all these elements here on the page, they are positioned based on your other elements. So for instance, you can see the title. I give it a margin top of 20 pixel here. It's positioned 20 pixel based on this element on top. Because the position is just, here is just relative. So it's relative to the other element. This is like the default one. We don't have to put it every time. But here, the footer, it's at an absolute position. So here I say, oh, 10 pixels from the bottom and 50% from the left. So it is not based on the other elements on the page. It's just by itself. So just a little bit of recap of everything we've done till now. We've seen that when you have a website, we have 3 files, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You can import the files inside. You can give styles. And then you can give IDs and class names to your HTML that you can take back in your CSS. And then you give styling by the type of style and the value. There's plenty of different values. Usually there's the default one like background color, padding, text align, and then you can also text align. And then there's also some that can be like with movement, like counter over. Or if I have an input, I can say when I focus that input, when I'm like writing in a search bar, like for instance here, when I'm writing, it becomes like focused like this, and it shows example. That's an example. Now let's do the last bit for today, which is having an actual working counter. So we've seen this ID, which is counter, and I'm going to go home, and I'm going to create a variable. So JavaScript is exactly like Python, so it works with variables. So are you all here on the JavaScript file? You good? If you have not created JavaScript in home.js, we gotta maybe also add it. So usually we add the JavaScript file at the end. So if you open your HTML, we're going to add the JavaScript file to our HTML. So you go script, source, and you put home.js. So basically what it's doing here, it's importing the home.js file, exactly like this. But usually we do CSS at the start, because it needs to be styled the page, JavaScript at the end, because JavaScript, it's better if it first the pages load and then the JavaScript load, so it loads faster. Because JavaScript is not fundamental. CSS is fundamental, so how you see a page. If there's no style, you can't see a page. JavaScript is movement, so you can load it after the page loads. With HTML and CSS, it's always from up to down. It's so important that in CSS, it's literally in the name. It's cascading style shit. So the way it interprets the CSS file is from the first style to the second style. So the style at the end will always override the previous style. So it's cascading. There's also another concept, which is like the concept of specificity of how important you want to go. So an ID will always win over a class name, obviously, because an ID is that specific element. A class name is a lot of elements. And a class name will win over general things. So first, I don't know, all navbar should be that size, but then all these types of navbar with that class should be this other size, but then this specific navbar should be that size, is this one's going to win. So it's cascading and also specificity. So this is how it interprets the page, the browser. It goes from up till down and also with specificity. JavaScript is just programming language. So I can create variables. You can do it with var. It's not like, it's a bit different to Python, where in Python you just say name equal. While in JavaScript, you have to say the type of variable that you want. There's only two types, so it's not that complex. There's let, there's const. Let is variables that are going to change. So let changing variable, for instance. Changing and let fixed. So these are two variables. I can give them like a value, for instance, of 5, and then a value of 10. So this one is going to be the one that's changing, and this one is going to be fixed. Let's look. It's really simple. So I can use something called alert to show things on the screen. So if I say alert, and I say changing, it's going to happen here if it works, if we import it correctly. It's going to tell us 10. Basically, what we did is we created a variable with the let, so it's a variable that we can change, set it equal to 10, and then alerted to the screen the value 10. And we have it alerted here. We can change it then, as it's a changing variable. It's a changing, it's equal to 5. This is quite similar to Python. And then just go here, and it's going to be 5, because it's from up till down. That's why I had to do a parenthesis. This goes down, basically. Here, what I can do is I can try to get that element. So our elements on the page are the technical term is DOM, but basically the idea is they're displayed on the page, and I can select them from the JavaScript to do operation on them. So what I can do is I can create a variable, so let counter, and set it to 0, because at the start we have 0 clicks. Then we want to take the elements. We say const, because our element is not going to change, and we say const, let's give it, for instance, counter button. We're going to set it equal to document.query selector. We can select the button. We're going to document.query selector. So here, small pause on what is happening. The document is what I'm saying, the DOM is a document. So I'm taking from the document, from the HTML document, I am taking the counter. And I'm taking it by ID, so by hashtag counter. So here I've created two variables. One is of type integer, so it's just a number, so it's 0. So let counter is a changing variable, it's going to change. The other one is a constant variable called counter button that is exactly equal to the counter button. It's just taking it. It's an element on the page. So then I can do an action. So counter button dot on click. Wait, just go and copy. It's a bit faster. But basically, you can just go here. You can do it in line as well. But basically, what you do is I'm just going to search for it and copy paste it. Stack Overflow. Okay, let's add it. The listener. I don't remember the syntax exactly. I'm just going to look. Add event listener JS. Okay, let's go like this. So basically what I'm doing is I'm listening to an event. In this case, it's click. And then I can do add a function to that. So say, oh, when I click on that button, I want a function. So I say, let's create a function. Let's create update counter, for instance. And then I can create a function with function update counter. And then I can add it basically. Wait. Okay, here we go. So what I'm saying is, when I click on the button, it should counter button add event listener. So listen to an event. The event is click, and you should run the function update counter. And for now, we're just going to say alert. Hello, you clicked me. So if I go here, reload the page, and click on that, it will alert you click me. Hello, you click me. So what it's doing is we're selecting the button from the HTML page, adding it to a function, adding an event listener. So you listen to the event click. And when it clicks, you run the function update counter, which alerts hello. Here now, what I can do is I can say, oh, every time I click it, I say counter. It's equal to counter plus 1. Do it on my own computer next time. It's just counter plus 1. So what is happening here? I'm just, every time I click, I add a counter. And then I can alert the value of that counter. For instance, alert counter. So here, if it works, say 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. So what I want to do now is going to have a paragraph that displays the amount of clicks and have it, the JavaScript, update that amount of clicks every time. That's our last task for today. So if we go here and a paragraph, say you clicked, and then we add a span maybe inside. A span is kind of a part of the paragraph that's a bit nicer. That's used, for instance, for these kind of things, like inside of a paragraph, another element that I want to update. And then I give it to it, I don't know, an ID, number, counter number, something like that. Counter number. So now it's not doing anything, but what I'm going to do is go into JS and say const counter number. There are plenty of different ways you can call the elements. I'm calling them just how it comes usually, but you have like rules. Like for instance, here what I'm doing is I'm capitalizing here, counter number with the capital N, but then I'm using this other type of style when I call the elements with the ID in the HTML. I'm using an underscore in the HTML. Make sure you follow. What I'm doing is I'm selecting that part. So not the entire paragraph, but just the number part, which starts at 0. And I'm saying every time I want it to be updated. So here I go. For instance, I go counter and I go dot style. I don't know, let's put it something like that. Dot update. Dot inner text. Or yeah, inner text. Or I can do inner HTML, works as well. It's equal. And then I say, for instance, to counter. Let's see if it works. Here's what I'm saying is I'm saying, okay, the counter number dot inner HTML, what it's doing is basically saying, oh, what should be inside of that span, which span is an element of the paragraph, should be the variable counter. And here it works. You can see it's updating it every time. So what our JavaScript is doing entirely is saying, initialize a variable counter at 0. Take the button, take the span, which is the number, which starts at 0. When the button, other listeners, you listen. When it's clicked, you add 1 to the counter, and you change the value of the span with the value of the variable counter. And that's it for the logic. That's how we can make logic. We can make more advanced logic. Like for instance, if I want to put, I was playing with a star animation. If I want to put stars, I can have, for instance, a function that generates random stars as background and generates them a random position. We're going to have JavaScript, generates random position, and then put them on the screen with a loop. All the things you know in Python, that can be done in JavaScript, basically, the main thing. So you have loops, you have variables, you have a list, arrays, it's called different, but still the same like reasoning. So that's how it works. So that's a bit all for today's session for the pair programming part. What we did is we created a base website. It's a bit ugly, I know, but still it gets the job done. So we have navbar, header, 3 sections, and then you have a counter, and then you have a JavaScript that updates a counter every time. This way, it's not saving it. So when I reload the page, it's not done. Usually, what will happen here is you will have a server with a database, DB, that will maybe store the amount of clicks. So then when I reload the page, it gives it back to the front end. That's something we're going to see next week. So kind of really quick recap. We created 3 files. We loaded the HTML file here on the browser, which actually loaded all of 3 files and make them work. Now, for next week and for the next 15 minutes, we're probably going to stay here, especially for the people in person, a bit less people online. But if you have any questions, you're very welcome to put them in the chat. If you want to program and create your own elements on the page, to kind of create your own page, I heavily recommend starting with a portfolio. It's a really good initial project at the right level of difficulty. So you can start and try to create a portfolio under your name. So you put like, a header with your name, an image with your headshot. Then you can put like your projects, maybe put your future coding projects. So that's a bit how you can create your own initial client-side website. Next week, we're going to focus on the backend. So basically what we have now is enough to create any sort of websites that appear on any page. Just obviously, it can get really complex in the amount of elements you put in a page. Obviously, in the Apple website, it's probably hundreds of elements. It takes a lot of time. But you can create in a couple of days a probably 1-page website.